It's now 7:07, and I would like to call this Planning and Zoning Commission workshop meeting of the City of Kyle to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Scheibmeyer,
Here.
Nidell,
Here.
McCall, Christie,
Here.
Yara,
Here.
Chase,
Here.
James.
Here.
Item number 3, citizen comments. There is no one, I will open the citizens comment period. There is no one here for citizens comments. Deb, do you have anybody or any messages that need to be read?
No, ma'am.
Okay, we will close citizens' comments. Did I do that right? Yes. Item number 4, general discussion. B, future land use map progress update. Mr. Kuhn.
So the future land use map progress update is really just removing the process, the project from stasis where it really has been. Quite honestly, I've not had the opportunity to move this forward with some of my other job responsibilities, but this coming Monday, the City of Kyle is going to be a brand new building official. So the building department will be once again brand new.
Howard, I hate to interrupt you, but your microphone's off. Can't hear you.
I'm glad you interrupted me. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Otherwise, I never would have known. I would have talked all night.
I was just making up everything you were saying. So.
Oh, okay. I hope it was good stuff. So what I'm doing is what I really want to do with this. Those of you who recall this process and when it stopped, basically in the second meeting in November, which was our November work session. Most of the information that was in the packet and presented to you at that meeting is the same information that is in the packet this evening. And I have 2 expectations of tonight's meeting. Really, it was to let you know that this is starting again, and I want to go over all that information again because I don't have very good notes, and if I did have good notes, I was not able to find them. So I wanted to make sure that the information that was put in front of you, most of which is the product of the city planner, Will Atkinson's notes, with a couple of changes and a couple of pieces of information that I was able to recall. I put that in the packet tonight. I want everybody's confirmation that's what we spoke about from last September through last November. Additionally, everybody's opportunity to review that is for the 3 new members that we have that weren't with us at that time. So bringing everybody up to speed on what we're doing moving forward. So confirm what's there is what we want there, and let everybody drink from the fire hose that for this is the first time them looking at that they can get brought up to speed. And then the second bullet point there is the next steps and the schedule of events and the procedure. And we can talk about that a little bit. Basically, the big picture is that I'm probably going to reach out to the city's communications department and see if I can get their help in publicizing this, because I want this to go forward through a public process where we can solicit comments from the public, but not necessarily under the guise of a public hearing at a voting meeting. I really would like the opportunity to get public input from folks in what I would term a rolling meeting, or basically just the opportunity for the information to be presented, be it through the web, or might make some posters and put them in the downstairs of the lobby of City Hall, so folks can look at it and then have suggestion boxes and that sort of things. But then also maybe have at least one structured meeting that happened in the evening where staff would be walking around, P&Z would be walking around, maybe the council would be walking around, and we can get some interaction in real time in first person. So I would like to be able to do that probably beginning, if everything were to go perfectly, I would say the end of May, probably the third or fourth week in May. But I know that everybody's busy and it's a lot to drop on them. So I'm going to be realistic and say that that's going to happen in June. And I think that the public comments would be open for probably 2 weeks or more. And the culmination of that 2-week period would be a public meeting that was hopefully manned by folks that would be able to come in and get in real time first person input on the map changes. So that would run till the end of June, and then the formal adoption process would be in July and August. So a process that I had hoped would take about 4 to 6 months is probably going to end up taking right on at 11 or 12 months. but that's okay. So that's the 2 bullet points that I wanted to bring up. I don't want to talk any more about it because I'm too close to this, so I'm afraid that I'm going to gloss over something that I'm taking for granted. So I'm going to open it up to you guys for questions of me. Anybody have any expectations of the information that was presented, or any questions about the information that was presented?
Go.
Yes, so I have some questions about the East Gateway District.
Okay.
If you look at the East Gateway District,
You mean the map or the narrative? The
well,
narrative?
the narrative, if you look at the end where it says preferred, conditional, and not recommended uses,
Uh-huh.
that does not match the East Gateway District uses on the land use recommended for the comp plan. So I'm not sure what we're recommending. As far as,
Where did you get the
okay,
preferred, conditional, and not recommended that are at the end of the narrative? You're stating that those don't match. What don't they match? Where?
the land use recommended plan, where there was another paper that was on there that had all the recommendations
And it
for all
had
of them.
it had East Gateway on that too?
Yes, it was
These
all in,
seven.
it was all in red at the very
Well-
end.
Yep, it's on the
And,
second, yeah.
and
it's
those
at the
were
very end.
quite different from,
Okay.
it wasn't
That's
just one
why
or two
that's why I'm
uses.
doing this, to be quite honest. Maybe that's what Will meant when he asked me. He sent me an email about it the other day. I might not have gotten the purpose of his question when he asked me. So
Recommended. Oh, yes. Lot 3.
does anybody have them? The red? You have the red ones?
Yes.
So what are they?
For East Gateway, recommended, I guess that's preferred, in red is R11, R12, R13, R1C, R1T, R2, R32, R33, CC, NC, RS, MXD, OI. That's
about
recommended.
double than what's on
Yep.
the narrative page.
I'll have to find that then.
And on the page, not recommended is R11, R12, and they're here recommended.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm honest to God, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not laughing at myself. I didn't try and
No.
do a bad job, but
Right.
No,
there's a lot
it's-
of information floating around, and I wasn't able to keep it all straight, which is why I wanted more eyes looking at this. So,
Right.
So that this is what I need. If you find this stuff, please let me know.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify which one we're going with. I assumed it was the one on the narrative because because it's much more streamlined or specific. Because I don't think we plan for R11 to be recommended
Absolutely not.
in the East Gateway. So I think
So
I think it's
Yeah.
that I think it's that page that's wrong. The land use recommendation. I think it's the
This looks
East
like
Gateway
it's
that's
right.
correct.
This makes more sense to me than the
The
red.
narrative makes more sense than the cheat sheet.
Yes.
Yes.
Here's my second question. Does the cheat sheet resemble any other districts that are listed on the cheat sheet? Does it look like it might have been cut and pasted from somewhere else as a working list to go from?
You mean like the wrong thing was copied?
Like new settlement? Does it look like
Like
that what's
Newtown
listed?
District, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, it
See that?
looks very
Yes.
similar to Newtown District.
So that might be what it was, is that the
Yes.
list that's in front of you on the cheat sheet that's listed in red was actually a working list to go from and just hasn't been properly edited. But the
Okay.
one that, because I would really be surprised that I had written this narrative and put it in front of you if it wasn't done.
Right.
So my expectation is that the narrative is probably the one that we should be working from.
Yes, the narrative looks correct to me, looking at it. Makes
Okay.
sense.
Great. Thank you. I just want to
These,
clarification.
these are
which
the
one we're going
details that I'm trying to jog my memory from last November, which quite honestly, last November was about 3 years ago in my mind. So
Also, we've got M2 and M3 as conditional under Newtown District. Does that make sense? I know we were just talking about it and approved it for the East Settlement, but
And that's in red also.
yeah.
Yeah, they that was one of the a brief discussion back early on. because of, we already knew the people that came by with the first meeting today were wanting to pursue adding that. And it was just it's still part of the notes that we didn't change.
But it looks like
So-
we've added it to new,
Right, but
Maybe I got-
it's in New Settlement and it's in Newtown. It's in both.
Wasn't the item we did in the last meeting
Newtown.
for Newtown?
Yes, it was,
okay, maybe,
Mhm.
Yeah, it was for Newtown.
okay.
but not for New Settlement.
But I'm fine with that addition.
Yeah.
So remove it from new settlement?
Well, I'm just saying, maybe there's some other cut and paste errors, which,
Oh, I don't know, we can discuss it. I'm fine putting it in there, but I don't know how everyone else feels.
Well, it's conditional,
I need to see.
so I'd be okay with it, because we'd have to come before us anyway.
Mhm. Okay.
Isn't it showing as recommended and the conditional ones are below it for new segment?
For New Settlement, the only recommended is OI.
Oh, that's it.
Everything else is conditional. Oh,
I see.
and
Oh, I
actually,
see, I see.
can I ask another question piggybacking on that?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the items that I had recommended when I did the new settlement was to make more make more uses recommended. I'm not as sure about that anymore as I was. Having them as conditional isn't necessarily a problem for me, but it is strange to be the only one that basically everything you have to have as conditional. But especially based on the item we just did on 4B in our last meeting.
And I believe that the way that new settlement is arranged, where only one is recommended, is twofold. Most of it is because most of the language in new settlement relates to, new settlement was supposed to be an employment center, the northeast area of the city and the northern part of the city. At the time that the comprehensive plan was done back in 2010, for whatever reason, the citizenry, the steering committee of the citizenry that put forth the final edits for the third party to put it together, had decided that the north and the northeast sections of the city would be an employment center. That would be the activity by and large. So,
Okay, but I'm sorry, I was talking about New Settlement. That's actually the southeast. I think Heritage Community or Transitional Settlement is the north. So it's, New Settlement is where Post Oak is. I live in New Settlement. But again, I am still fine keeping most things conditional. It was just something we had talked about before,
okay.
changing some things to be recommended, but
Oh, I thought we were talking about the new town community.
I'm,
I wonder if some of that.
I'm just saying, it was my suggestion before to add more things as recommended. I'm not sure I agree with that recommendation anymore.
Okay. It's those fancy new light switches.
Okay.
Just give me the buckets, yeah.
Anybody have any other questions?
I think one thing that I'm going to point out is that the regional node that's listed on the proposed updates, the November 9th draft, I do recall that we had asked for some changes to this. Specifically, I'm looking at the regional node that's down at 21 and 150. You'll notice that it's largely just a round circle with one other little piece of land, which was the piece of land that we talked about tonight. I think the product of our discussion that night was it would be more of a buffer from State Highway 21 that went back to the northwest, back towards town, and encompass more of that frontage. So one of the things I'm going to have our map operator do is expand that to be a little bit, to cover more of the ground down there. Because right now we've got East Gateway that goes all the way down to 21. I think we've established that 21 is probably not going to be appropriate for that low density, low intensity uses. We need to beef that up quite a bit.
That's correct. Thank you.
I have a question. And it's just more of a principal question about the Newtown community. And this time, the one on the north side. What is the logical reason for keeping the west part of Newtown community and the east part of Newtown community together for the sheer fact that they look like they're going to have very different outcomes for what that community is going to look like on the west and east.
Yeah, I mean, I know it looks like they're bifurcated by the regional node in I-35, but that regional node is actually an applique that goes over top of the district. So if you can think, if you were to take that yellow and just sort of peel that back like a sticker, that Newtown community would encompass everything on the north central part of the city, and the expectation of what it would look like as it gets away from the high corridor, you know, the I-35 corridor. You're right, most of Newtown that's on the east side, I say most of it is pretty much built out. You know, it's already, its land pattern is established. You might get some development to come along in some of the larger greenfield areas that are complementary, but they're well on their way. The west side, on the other side, you know, obviously there's the quarry that's there, and we've got some of the, you know, Plum Creek is pretty much established. Their zoning is set. Their site selectors and landscape or real estate professionals are working really hard to fulfill that. So I don't know how much harm there is in keeping them together versus either creating a new district or merging some of the other districts that are further east and making them creep to the west towards the interstate. That's just a policy decision if you want to do that. But for right now, the question's almost moot because of the stuff on the east side has such limited development potential because it's already built on now.
Well, the only reason I asked that is just because I know they have the TIRZ too, that is going to build a much different community at the corner there of Coors Crossing and 1626. And if that still kind of fits in with the narrative of what we want Newtown community to continue to be like.
I think it does for the sole purpose that the TERS and all the other special districts are really much more detailed at the parcel level. Those are actual land use entitlements versus the comprehensive plan, which doesn't entitle anything. It doesn't assign zoning or land use to anything. It's more of a guiding force. There's not really that much that's in Newtown that's not already built out and operating or already well on its way with a zoning entitlement plan. So you're right. You probably could trace the outlines of some of the things that aren't in those districts, but I think if you did that, it would be the minority of the gross land area that hasn't had a plan assigned to it. So the rest of those areas that don't have the plan assigned to them, do they still meet the expectations of what Newtown, you know, calls for in the narrative? I think they do, but it's a discussion point. I don't think we want to chop it up any finer. Is there any harm to leaving those areas in Newtown? I don't find that there is. Gosh, even when I came here, I mean, it's been about 6 years. Kyle was primarily a north and south city, right? All my zoning maps and everything, the old ones that are up on my wall, they're all portrait. You know, they don't. But now everything, especially because of the ETJ and because of this future land use map, everything is landscape. Everything is so much wider of how much it's grown. I think the number we use is 85 square miles of ETJ and city limit. City limits themselves, I think, are about 35, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it was in the high teens when I came here.
Commissioner Chase, I don't want you to feel left out because I only see you as a picture on my screen. Do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay.
Were we still wanting to consider having warehouse or CM conditional in the regional node, or is that something that we want to strip from there or include, or what do y'all think?
I kind of liked it, but
My preference would always be to do, you know, comprehensive plans, and then after that would be your actual zoning ordinance and your land use controls that would facilitate what's in the comprehensive plan to make sure that somebody comes in, doesn't have to fight against it. And then after that, you usually would want to get into overlays for specific regions within your city, because, you know, Kyle's large enough now that we know that area over there to the west, which, you know, we term, you know, the ranch landscape, is quite a bit different than the super regional node, quite a bit different than the heritage community way on the east side. So usually you would get into sub areas, and those sub area plans would usually be, a lot of people like to term them overlays, but they almost function as zoning districts unto themselves. I struggle with the list we have of what's recommended and what's conditional, because to your point, Commissioner Scheibmeier, warehouse and construction manufacturing as a use really should be located at regional nodes. The reason I say that is because usually there's a high amount of vehicle traffic, especially truck traffic. And I don't want high activity, high volume truck traffic going back into my community, back into my neighborhoods, and punishing streets that usually weren't designed with an expectation of that type of volume. So we usually like to keep things like trucking terminals, and, you know, warehousing is going to have a lot of logistics going in and out, and construction manufacturing obviously is going to have raw materials coming in one side of the building and finished and value-added materials coming out of the other side of the building. You want to keep that as close to your high traffic, high corridors, high volume corridors as possible, meaning off ramps from the interstate and other state highways, state roads, which are usually built to a higher standard. So from a land use perspective, they're entirely appropriate. From a design standpoint and an operations standpoint, they typically are eyesores, right? Usually those types of operations are more concerned with the product than they are with the aesthetic of where the product is value added. So you get a lot of steel buildings, you don't get a lot of landscaping. Usually they're not even really willing to pave parking areas. They would rather the trucks just go through on Caliche. So for that reason, and these are land use questions, so from a land use perspective, warehouse and CM is entirely appropriate in regional node. Conditionally, we typically can use conditionally to mean most of the areas on the map that are in regional node probably need to be evaluated for the condition of the roadway network that goes in, through, and past the site, and additionally the availability of water, wastewater. Those are usually the biggest conditions on whether or not something is necessarily appropriate when the ask comes to you. But more and more, we're going to have to start to look at the view shed. We have had some clients come forward with requests to be able to use larger parcels along the I-35 frontage for warehouse and for construction manufacturing zoning. From a land use perspective, from an economic development perspective, that's wildly popular. I would love them. But it also shapes the front door, or at least the picture window, of the city of Kyle. As people come up and down I-35 and they look around, what are they going to see? Are they going to see buildings with masonry facades and nice stands of turf and maybe a pond with a fountain in it and trees all over? And is it going to look like a business center? Or will there be large stockpiles of raw materials and unpaved parking lots? And Kyle right now doesn't have a highly developed requirement for what the product should look like. We do have the I-35 corridor overlay, and that's a good start. In my professional history, I would think that that's probably just touching the high point. I think we could get a lot more detailed in what we allow in that. So that, from a policy standpoint, I'm all about the warehouse and the CM. I would like to start looking at later the ability to require certain projects have a different aesthetic rather than the lowest common denominator, because, you know, a lot of businesses that are involved in the warehousing and the construction manufacturing is all about, you know, just the product and the efficiency of the product, but not necessarily the environment. And we're the ones that should be concerned with the environment and have less of concern of what they make or produce. It's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, it should stay.
I don't feel comfortable with sheet metal buildings along I-35 if we can avoid it, so.
Agreed. And from an I-35 standpoint, we have that covered, right? I-35 overlay, we bring the conditional use requests, which are not, they're not conditional use requests, that's just what they're called, but really, they're just aesthetic reviews because we have the overlay. It's tough in Texas now because of what the state legislature did to us 2 years ago, where they said that we're not allowed to mandate building materials. Anything that's allowable in the applicable international code for construction needs to be made allowable in your community. The state has preempted the cities from being able to state what somebody can use as a building material and what they can't. So overlays like that, if they've not already been precluded, are incredibly difficult to move forward now. So
Can you do it through creating a different zoning category that's warehouse plus?
it's a state preemption.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So the
I'm afraid the
35
backlash to that is going to be is that more and more cities are just going to say, no, if you're going to build something ugly in my city, I'd rather you not build it at all. And they just won't give over the zoning assignment, in which case that stuff's just going to move out to the unincorporated areas where there is no restrictions on use.
Or they'll do a, what do you call it?
Could be a development agreement.
Development agreement, yeah, okay.
With the I-35 overlay, there's a section in the House bill that passed where they have areas of architectural importance that are exempted, but they essentially have to be in place prior to the date of that state law. And so that's where the I-35 overlay is. We've been using that as a preemption because state law says we can. It doesn't define what areas of architectural importance are, but you have to have them there before
Can we
then.
extend the overlay boundaries? Because it's already in existence, we just make it a little bit wider?
That's a good question, and that's a question probably for legal to take a look at.
I don't know if it's been asked in the state. I don't know if it's been challenged in the state or not.
To answer the original question, I do still support doing it conditionally in the regional node or warehouse, just because there are some spots of our regional node where it, could definitely make sense. And conditionally, I think it should be an option.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll agree with that too. I think that the hardest part of that is obviously you want, the aesthetic aspect of it, but also you don't really want trucks going down, causing extra damage to our roads and all of our bridges and infrastructure. Like I think about how that cascades, and I think with conditional we can still do things around that, just to make sure that it still meets the needs of Kyle and the needs of what we're looking for out of our land use.
We have to learn how to dance.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, so if we do it conditionally, but can you just let them know that it needs to look good or we're not going to approve it? Or it can be just whatever, it's just there? Oh my, yeah, well, I got my answer.
No, when zoning
money
questions come before you, it's exclusively a land use question. You're not supposed to consider anything else. In fact, not only when a land use question comes to you, you don't just consider whatever the applicant may or may not be doing, which they don't need to tell you why they're zoning in Texas. You need to consider not only what they're asking, but what they're not asking. Every other use that's allowable there. So if somebody comes forward with a request for RS because you know that they're going to build a fast food restaurant, well, at the end of the day, when they walk out that door with an approval, they don't need to build that fast food restaurant. Once the zoning entitlement's there, they can build anything that's allowable in RS. And so maybe that site wasn't appropriate for a car dealership, but that's what they're going to do. They're going to go out there. So never listen to what they tell you that they're going to build, because it's irrelevant to the discussion. They're going to build everything that's allowable in that district and every district beneath it. And you need to be comfortable with all of it, because once it's entitled, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I go back and ask a remedial question? Or I don't know if it's remedial, but the Midtown District, it's got a rather limited recommended use. And I'm thinking specifically of the corner there where Walgreens is and there's a stripes there. That's a very interesting intersection, and maybe it'll be an afterthought after the developments west occur. FM 2770 and 150. Yeah. It would be in a really attractive area for, I would say, a little bit denser retail than they have there now, a grocery store or something like that. There's so many people, you have people coming in west or east from Wimberley and stuff like that. Are we precluding any, what I would call positive developments like that from occurring because we don't have them in the recommended, or we don't want to go there under Midtown District? All we have really is neighborhood commercial. Or no, we're fine because we've got RS and.
Yeah. Community commercial and RS are both conditional. So are you asking to move those to recommended, or?
Does it hinder people who might want to build something there because it's not on the recommended? Maybe I don't know if that is an answerable
No,
question.
I understand the question. Before I answer, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where I might be wrong. But I'm leaning towards no. It doesn't hinder them. It still gives them the opportunity to ask the question. Again, when we use conditional, most of the conditions that we evaluate before being able to say go, no go, are related to the transportation network and the water, wastewater availability. I can say that there are some blocks within the Midtown District that are inappropriate for RS or CC or even NC, although it's recommended everywhere. But there's obviously an intersection up there where it would be wildly appropriate by anyone's evaluation. And that's what I like about conditional, is that we can talk about corridors, probably going to be a yes. Necessarily the corner of Elm and South Elm, probably not. In Hometown, probably not. In Plum Creek, probably not. That type of thing. So I think it's working really pretty well. And quite honestly, that pattern of having almost everything under conditional would almost be what we should do. What he was asking earlier about the Newtown community. The Newtown community that's east of 35 is largely built out. So anybody that comes in and asks for something over there should probably have to answer to a higher level of scrutiny, simply because the condition at that point would also be adjacent land uses and whether or not it's appropriate in light of adjacent land uses. Which is true of conditional. See, the thing that we've listed these things as either being recommended or conditional. Conditional's fine, but what the applicant should be able to have the surety is, what are the conditions? What will you evaluate my request against? So at least they can make an argument in their application. We don't do that. We don't say what conditional is. I tell people when they ask me, based upon past performance since I've been here, but I don't believe that it's written anywhere about what the conditions are that we consider it against. But I think the answer to your question is no. I don't think it's a barrier to entry. I think it's an important question that needs to be asked of this group and answered by this group when you make your recommendation to council, because of the nature of what's already built in Midtown.
So you don't think there's possibly any need to put a small local node right there at that intersection?
It's a naturally occurring node anyway. I wouldn't object to it. I don't know if it would be the yellow one.
It just
right?
baffles me that
local
corner
node.
hasn't been further developed. It seems like it'd be one of the first places. There's so much
It's
stuff
a
going in.
naturally occurring local node
Yeah.
unto itself, but I could see there. I mean, one thing that I've never understood is the regional node that's further west. The regional node that's way out past Arroyo Ranch or whatever, that's all the way out there on the section of 150. That baffles me. I think the only thing I can imagine is that was expected, or the intended tie-in of the pass, the 150 bypass that's going to come up through and intersect 150 West somewhere up there. I guess it's going to be there. At that point, they would expect that intersection would be high activity, high traffic, which a regional node would be appropriate. But right now, if you do a windshield survey, from the ground, driving on that section of road, you'd never in a million years think that somebody would drop an HEB or a Home Depot or something else that would be appropriate for a regional node.
All right. I'm good.
I have a question on the core area transition, or core transition area. I don't know what which is the correct terminology for
Core
that.
area transition, the CAT.
Okay, the CAT. There's noting that there's quite a bit of vacancy compared to the areas in the super regional and the regional node. Are we empowering it with the proper land uses? Is a question that I have. Thinking about that.
Which one again?
It's the CAT right in the middle. Core area
the pink
transition.
area that's on I-35 between downtown and the super regional node.
Yeah, just south of the super regional node.
No, that's the original town.
Well, one of the reasons I asked this is I believe the time before I started here, there was a discussion about the apartments that were right just north of that, or possible land use where they wanted to zone it to an R33, or I believe. It was in the RS zoning right there behind Target. And I was just curious, looking at these things, are we empowering it with the right uses?
But that was in the super regional node, wasn't it?
That is in the super regional.
Correct. That's why I'm saying as we get out of those into less dense
okay.
uses.
The core area transition, always makes me ask more questions than I'm able to actually offer answers. There is residential there. There is, stable. I won't call it historic, but it's some of the first residential in the city was centered around that area. If you're not talking about the original town, but as far as development goes, I'm willing to listen to discussion or questions or anything that you want to put forward, but you can make cases for and against all sorts of different activity on that section of I-35 frontage on both sides, east and west. Yeah, I can make a dozen arguments. Right now,
I just don't see anything that defines
it's all
it.
commercial. Everything that's recommended is commercial in one way or the other, non-residential at the very least. And then conditionally, residential is an acceptable outcome. I don't know necessarily that we would have. So R1A, there is a provision conditionally in the R1A zoning for single-family detached, but by and large, it was made to be either zero lot line or R1T is single-family attached, in a townhome architecture alone. R1C doesn't talk about an architecture type, but it's residential one-family condominium. They're supposed to be a rental property, a rental product that's usually done on a parent lot with a bunch of similar structures around it. And then R32 and R33 are both multifamily. I want to say, is it like 18 and 21 units to the acre respectively, or something to that effect? So, or maybe even more than that in R33. So the development pressure that the staff, at least that I have noticed on this section, is low. Although we did just get a project entitled that's on the west side of Philomena, that's still east of the interstate. But I don't know. What do you think? You can see the list of what's appropriate, and you're all reasonably aware of what's on both sides of the interstate going through there. Do you think they should be primarily commercial recommended and residential as conditional? And
That would,
when we look
I
at
mean-
the list there, that we didn't touch that. We didn't change any of those. All that's black, so I assume that's all the stuff that's in there today.
half serious, though. If we ever did get light rail, that would be the gold area in the city.
So and Jeff Barton's project is moving forward too, and that's all vertical mixed use and a mixture of single family attached and townhomes and all sorts of stuff like that, which falls into the core area transition uses. He has his family's property is just north of the traffic circle at Marketplace and North Burleson, just south of where they cut off Burleson from the access road. And he's going to be doing an urban village there. He's got his entitlements and everything. So that's a project that hasn't broken ground yet, but they're moving forward with it.
I think I like the list as it is. I don't necessarily understand R1A there, but yes, recommended the retail services, MXD, yeah, that makes sense. And then conditionally, we could consider, R33 or something along those lines.
R1A in this I think R1A in this context is the expectation that it was narrow lot, single family detached. I think they want 35-foot lots of single family detached structures, almost, bungalow type residential, which would be the lowest density estate lots in a broader context of whatever was developed. So I think somebody would do something probably as a PUD, and there would be some areas where you would be able to buy into that project, a mixed use project, and you would be able to buy a single family standalone.
Yeah, that would make sense. I understand that.
And that's one of the conditions that we would look at the time that they were asking for an entitlement.
No, but the list as it is now makes sense to me at least.
I don't have a problem with the list. I have a bit of an issue with the R1A, just personally. I just don't see that there. But it's fine. It's conditional, and it'll come before us anyway.
Agreed.
Is there anything
we're not-
missing, though? Is there anything missing?
I don't think so.
I mean, all three of our commercial, shopping districts are there.
There.
Our SCC and NC. MXD is also there, which makes the availability for high-density multifamily along with commercial. Our employment center, the expectation for what we would have Class A office would be O&I. But there's a couple of other uses there that are community-minded. That's the I in it, and OI. So the allowable uses are exhaustive as for what's recommended today. If you can't find a zoning that permits what you're looking to do, you're probably not going to fit in the core area transition. You are surrounded on every side by something.
You're probably not going to make money on the project, right?
I have a question on something else if we're good with that.
Done that.
Okay. Going back to the East Gateway District narrative, just
Close that.
so I had one question about the preferred or the uses. The third use on there's R13, R1T. The third one says R2. I'm not sure if that's a typo or if R2 is one that I'm unfamiliar with.
R2 is duplexes,
Oh, okay.
residential two-family. So it's attached units.
Okay.
So R13 are the 50-foot single-family detached. R1T is townhome. R2 is residential two-family duplexes, which are not stacked, so they would be side by side. These lights
It's like a light show.
need to.
And there's no extra charge for it either.
I don't see that really most anywhere else. Is there a reason that we're looking to add that into East Gateway, but we're not in the other areas of our city?
East Settlement has it, R2. Historic Core Area has
Oh,
R2.
you're right. That's correct.
I'm looking at
Conditional.
it specifically from the standpoint of creating a diverse housing product. I want to see more types of housing in Kyle.
You're right.
There is a part of me, and it's not just tied to the dearth of product that's out there available. I don't know if you've tried to buy a home lately, but it's it is a seller's market right now. You can sell whatever you want and you'll probably make a lot of money with it, but the stock out there is missing.
Where are you going?
I think there's something to be said that we should be able to get more townhomes and duplexes and other types of missing middle step-up product, getting people out of strictly rental multifamily, going straight into single-family detached, 3 bedrooms. That's a big
Yeah, it's a
leap
big
for a
jump.
lot of people.
It
And,
is.
man, I'm a white-collar professional, and I was 30, almost 31 years old before I bought my first home, simply because moving from an apartment, which were really expensive, it was really overpriced, and it was hard to save money for a down payment to buy a house to get into that cycle. But had there been an attractive option for us to buy a townhome or buy half of a duplex or something to that effect, we could have gotten out of the apartment earlier. So I can imagine that at the time that I had put that in there, I've got a pretty good mix in there. I've got some multifamily, I've got duplex, I've got townhomes, I've got single-family detached. It's probably why it's there.
Okay. And then also just RS, is there a reason that's under preferred and not conditional? Because again, I mean, it's definitely should have RS in there, but I would also assume there are some areas of the East Gateway that necessarily shouldn't. And
I think it would probably be self-selecting that it's going to be on 150 or close to 21. I don't know. I guess it's a push. I guess it could be conditional.
Going back to your other comment, I wholly support a huge mix of opportunities for home ownership, including townhomes and condominiums. If they're done well, they're really quality. They could be beautiful and get people into home ownership that don't have to deal with a yard and don't have to deal with a lot of other things that they don't have time for.
The closest thing we're getting to now is single-family detached that are rental products. That's the new thing. That's the new pressure. Everybody I hear that's coming in wants to build a subdivision, but instead of just putting fee simple single-family lots together where you buy everything, they're now just building projects of single-family detached homes and you rent the house instead of renting an
Yeah,
apartment.
see, I don't like those. I don't
A
think
whole
those are,
subdivision, they would
Yeah.
rent?
yeah.
Wow.
Can
A lot of them in my,
I
a
just
lot of
wanna
them in
say
my
that-
neighborhood,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah. A lot of them in my neighborhood are selling at very high prices for rental.
This is a little different. I actually did the most successful one in the country, and Addison down in southeast Austin is one of the first of its kind. And believe it or not, the section, which is about 153 homes, is the best looking in that community.
Wow.
The architecture type's not my challenge.
Yeah.
The land use isn't specifically my challenge. I just think the lack of diversity in the availability of housing type. I mean, radios have a dial for a reason. Sometimes you want to listen to that, and sometimes you want to listen to the other thing. I think we should have the same diversity of housing type. So if somebody wants to buy this or that, and at different eras of your life, you want to live in different places. Young people typically live in apartments, not just because it's available, but it suits them. When you're active and you're out a lot, your home sort of just turns into a dorm. You don't spend a lot of time there. You spend a lot of time out and active. And then as you start to get older, you start to, what you can afford is what you buy. And then again, as you empty nest and you get older, you want to downsize and you want to get into something that might have less of a maintenance requirement. So that's where, condominiums can come in. There is a time in your life and an activity period of your life that often has an appropriate real estate type behind it. Kyle doesn't have that diversity.
Nope.
We have
Does
apartments and we have single-family
Right.
home that
That's
you
it.
can own and a number of single-family homes that are being purchased specifically for the purpose of making them into
Yeah.
rental.
Yeah.
I would like there to be more architecture types and more ownership types, just by and large. And another good reason is that it's a little bit more recession-proof. So if for some reason interest rates did something weird, or for whatever reason the real estate market just drops out and single-family homes, become a white elephant that nobody wants to get a hold of, we have a lot of it. And if you have a lot of anything that goes bad,
Yeah.
the lack of diversity can cause you a challenge. So that's another reason to diversify, to just make sure that something is always popular in your town.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm coming to you with 15 years of affordable housing background, all the way down to we finance farm labor housing, but we also do financing for low and very low income families in home ownership. So that home ownership piece is really, really important.
Yeah,
Do we have a designation for detached condominium overlays? It's like a cottage style designation.
I'm sorry, do we have a what? A zoning?
A, do we have a designation for a detached condo type
Yes,
of?
that would be R1C. If you were gonna build a home and sell the inside of the home, but keep the outside and the common areas and everything in a different, corporation, you would build that in R1C.
Howard, does the fact that we don't have R1T as a recommended in a lot of these things, does that keep that from happening? Because now they have to ask for conditional use, then it stirs everyone up, or? Well, I'm thinking about the property there, just south of hometown.
Right. R1T works, but not universally, not everywhere. I think conditionally it's okay. And the number one thing that I think about it with R1T is that you can build up to 10 homes to the acre from a density standpoint, which is going to have an associated traffic component that comes along with that, and a higher population per acre that comes along with it. So I think conditionally it's important, if for no other reason in Kyle, wastewater, the number of LUEs that come out of townhomes when you have 10 units to the acre. Where most of our single-family detached stuff, Kyle would consider high density to be about 3.6 or 3.9 single-family homes to the acre to be high-density single-family detached, and townhomes can more than double that. So I like keeping townhomes conditional. Again, I don't think the fact that something is preferred or conditional is a barrier to entry. I think it's probably just an admission on the part of the regulatory authority, the city in this case, that what they're looking at might tax the city and could harm the city regionally. So it deserves more introspection.
Along those lines, this just popped into my head because I've thought about it, but on the uptown, down the road, I've always thought that would, above the restaurants and shops and everything, that would be a great place for condos. Has that ever been considered, that, like, ownership rather than rental?
I'm certain, yeah. I mean, as far as ownership arrangement, I don't really get into that very much. I'm more of a land use guy.
Okay.
But I'm sure the folks that are developing that have considered it a number of different ways to try and figure out what makes it successful.
But are they going forward with rental?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, just curious. I would live there. I would live above.
I will say I think it's really important. We've talked a lot about home ownership and things. I want to come back to, I think it's really important that we have a really diverse housing pool, like Howard just said, but that also includes rental. I think it's really important that we have a lot of rental, like a lot of well-qualified rental properties in Kyle. Folks like myself cannot buy a house right now. It's nearly impossible for you to manage kind of buying a house, not only because of the things it costs to deposit, but also because of the savings you have to acquire over time. And right now, a one-bedroom apartment in Kyle is running almost $1,100 for a one-bedroom. Let alone get to the 2 bedrooms and you're looking at $1,300 to $1,500. Get to the 3 bedrooms and you're shoving $2,100, $2,200. And we're 25 miles from the center of Austin. Like, we're experiencing a lot of pressure on renters that's not going to lead to them to becoming homeowners. So we also need to make sure that we do have options for rental properties, like we see the Urbana Plum Creek. That may not be the most people's favorite place to be, but I think it's a great place between just being an apartment and like owning your own home. And also, it's really busy. It's really hard to have a life and own a home and have all the maintenance and things that take care of it. I think it's really important that we have a stock of housing that meets all of those people's needs. That way they don't have to go live in Buda or New Braunfels or San Marcos to achieve the things they're looking to achieve, or Austin.
Yeah, and that's the discussion, that's the point that I'm kind of putting forward, is that the rental products today are so expensive to the point that you can't save money to get into something. But if you're trying to save 20% for a down payment on a single-family detached home, which in Kyle is going to be, I don't know, let's say $280,000. It's going to be easier to save 20% if you can get a really nice townhome that's going for 100 or 105.
Right.
And then you can live in that and be paying your mortgage and earning equity in it. And then when you want to move up to that single family detached, that's 280. You can sell that 105 unit, which hopefully will have appreciated, and take some of the money that you were saving for yourself and put those two together and step up. It's getting people, it's accelerating the process towards home ownership rather than living in, I was right there with you. I was in a 2-bedroom apartment until I was, into my 30s. And I can remember I just remember paying the rent every month thinking, we're never saving any money. We're never saving any money that's going to go towards a down payment when all of it is going into this wildly overpriced rental. So, yeah, that's the point of the diversity. It's the ownership chain, not necessarily the architecture type or even the ownership arrangement.
And also, the challenge with rental is it keeps going up every year. See, with a fixed-rate mortgage, you've got a payment, even if it's $1,500, $1,800, what it may be, but that's a fixed-rate mortgage other than your property taxes. The problem with rentals is they keep going up, and so that creates challenges, too.
I hate to interrupt our discussion, but I think we're a little bit off base. And we still have another item here, the lighting. So I wanted to know if you wanted more input or whatever. I just want to zero us back in.
I
Is
always
that
want
okay?
more input.
Can I make one more comment? And then
Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying about the need to make sure the infrastructure can match the plan. But in my mind, I think if R1T is conditional, I think that is a barrier sometimes, because I've been privy to watch one of the shows where people came out for it. And I don't know if they're all like that, but there's a lot of opinions by a lot of different people about townhomes and some of these affordable things we're talking about in their area that I think might prevent people from even considering it. They don't want to mess with it. And I don't do this for a living, so I don't want to. I'm just going by the small anecdotal evidence I have. I'm wondering, should we not push R1T as a preferred use in a couple of places to try and promote that so that it doesn't have to become an issue?
It's listed as preferred in our East Gateway. So I'm not sure if that's what we're talking about at the moment or not, but it is there. Are there other ones you are suggesting to move it to?
Midtown, yeah. It actually seems like a good fit, but I don't know about the utility infrastructure part of it. I may get a shoe thrown at me by somebody later. But
As an example, when we were the rezoning for the live track that happened at the last council meeting, I believe, it went through. I don't remember it was first or second read, but it passed. It was conditional in the historic area for close to downtown, but it was conditional specifically, like Howard mentioned, for infrastructure reasons. The existing wastewater to the site is in really bad shape, but because they asked for townhomes and they were able to get a higher density out of it, they were able to make the pro forma work by doing a lot of off-site improvements to their wastewater. And that was the reason, it seems like that was a huge reason of why it passed, because they were making a huge, legitimately a huge improvement in the wastewater infrastructure in the northern part of downtown. Not to say that it can't be recommended elsewhere, but
food for thought, I guess. But
yeah.
Okay, anything else on this topic?
I think I'm good. Have some updates for you, probably not the May work session. I wouldn't imagine that we would necessarily have a scheduled May work session related to the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
Because by then I would imagine that we would be having the walking charrette would be the earliest part of having the public portion. So I would imagine that the next time we would have a work session related to it would be June.
And I really like your communication and what you wanted to do with this and the charrettes and that type of thing. Can we also make sure that we're also doing some online of the same process?
That's the plan. I'll talk with
Great.
communications and find out what we can and can't
Great,
do.
thank you.
Okay, item 4C, discussion regarding amendments to section 41-146, streetlights.
Okay, Will Atkinson for the record. Let me pull up this document. All right, so to give a bit of background on, and this is a working document that we have uploaded here. To give a bit of background on this, within the last 6 months, actually this year really, administration asked planning staff to lead the charge in terms of updating our streetlight ordinance to add some stuff in there related to dark sky compliance and decorative poles and what have you, and asked me to coordinate with both engineering and public works related to that. And so we did. Myself, Joanne Garcia, and Scott Egbert. Joanne she's in engineering. And then Scott Egbert is the division manager for the streets department. And so we collaborated together, and this is the product of it. It perhaps went a little bit more than what City Council asked, but it makes sense what we did, or we believe it makes sense anyway. So, so a lot of it, essentially what it is making sure we are updating placement of street lights. That's the beginning section of it, to make sure there's adequate lighting for safety purposes, like on intersections, and where to place it based off, if it's a minor street intersecting with a major street or two major streets and what have you. That's what all this mostly is in the first part. We added a diagram in there also from, I believe it's from TxDOT. We updated also, we made some references to decorative street lighting, which we'll see later on in the document. And we updated the lumens and the light sizes for the street types. Prior to this, they weren't LEDs. This was written back in the early 2000s, the subdivision code. It was never updated, and now only use most departments across the state use LEDs. We use LEDs. PEC uses LEDs. TxDOT is switching to LEDs. So we coordinated with appropriate staff at Public Works and made sure that those are updated as well to be appropriate, because you wouldn't be able to get an LED with that sort of level of power, if you will, on a lumen size. So if it stayed in the red there. Down here is where we start talking about whether, a subdivision has the standard, what we call Cobra headlights. They're the standard street lights that come up and over, and they kind of arc over, and they have the light facing down, or if you want decorative. We were told that keep the requirement for the Cobra heads, the standard ones, but if we need to make a provision to allow decorative street lights, but if they do, they need to be maintained and owned by the HOA. So that is an option. We do encourage it. However, it is not required. And we were just talking about how we wrote in here about how they have to be dark sky compliant, what have you, decorative poles. Some clarifications on those. and what have you. And also trying to give us some flexibility as well, because we don't want it, with city projects, we do want to, as best as we're able, if finances allow, be able to put in decorative lights to show off the city for new street projects, along major corridors and what have you. But sometimes finances don't allow, so we do need to have that flexibility to where we do have standard lights allowable. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Do y'all have any questions?
The safety requirements are always met, even if the HOA decides to do their own decorative lighting, from a standpoint of how far we're illuminating things.
Yes, we will still review it with the subdivision improvements that we review. That goes through staff. That's the same document that shows like how wide the pavement has to be, the type of curbing used, water, wastewater. They have to show a lighting plan for all the lights, the street lights, and this is just, we still have to review that.
Does the dark sky portion of the ordinance deal with the frequency of the light? We're not going to get some bright whites here and
So there's another section of the code where it talks about lighting zones in chapter 54. And so residential neighborhoods have to have a certain lighting zone. Stadiums are under a different lighting zone. A shopping center has a different one completely. So yes, they'll need to be within those as well.
Okay.
It's just not built into the subdivision side of the code, but it is there.
Anyone else?
I'll just add, personally, I'm a fan of dark sky lighting because I think it does improve safety. It reduces the glare, and I come from living in communities that require dark sky. And when I'm driving on an interstate in the past, at night, even when Department of Transportation has the hooded lights, I can see much better when I am on an interstate in a city that just has the glare lights. The glare is in my eyes, and it's not as safe, in my opinion.
In I believe it was 2016, the city of Kyle adopted the model ordinance, the dark sky model ordinance. We made some amendments to it to make it relevant to our zoning, because they have different zones of light trespass that's allowable per the intensity of the district. So we require cutoff fixtures. We don't allow glare. We require photometric plans at the time of development for commercial projects and anything that's done in the higher activity zoning districts. So I would like to keep that going and forward. I think you only get one opportunity to do that, and to do so as early as possible was important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we might consider down the road, I know you're in your spare time, so I'm not putting that out there, but maybe a public education campaign to where people understood what it is so they could make choices on their personal homes, not requirements, just choices, yeah, that kind of thing.
one other comment too. Would it be prudent to have an escrow requirement for the HOAs for paying the lighting and utility bills? Because I've seen some in my neighborhood before take a while to get fixed. I'm sure they probably think it's the city's fault, even though they're decorative poles. There should be a response. I feel like we might need to address the response by the HOA as to when they're going to get something fixed, and not let something linger for a while. I'm not trying to make an issue here, but I have seen it before. And
No, I get it, and I think what it boils down to is whose is it, right? When the infrastructure itself is installed, does it get dedicated over to the city? And I was going to ask, Will, is there any expectation on the hardware? Are we going to have a metric or a requirement for what hardware needs to be installed? I know that's a function that Public Works already has now, but I think that was part of the impetus. This whole thing is to get a decision on what would be installed. The city had sought to standardize the actual poles themselves at any time that the infrastructure was,
Was the
ceded over to
city's.
the city after installation. We didn't want 12 different types of light poles out there for every different neighborhood, because when you would have to keep all those in stock.
Oh, yeah.
And it's easier that if you are going to have something in stock beforehand, that it all be the same. We're not opposed to the neighborhoods having their own individual style or their own expectation, or being able to put the punctuation on their own subdivision. But if they choose to do that, then they're also choosing to maintain that infrastructure themselves.
So the
They
impetus,
will keep them, and it is on them to replace anything that breaks or needs to be upgraded.
the impetus of these revisions are more trying to standardize to get the number of spare parts down for the city and
I believe so, just to standardize and streamline the process, because,
Right.
it's when you get too many individual agreements, when every subdivision gets their own entitlement, administration just becomes a real nightmare.
I guess I was
at the scale
broadening
that we
that.
do it.
I think the city has a vested interest in making sure the streets are properly lit, and if an HOA goes the route of putting up their own things and they take forever to fix them, and it becomes a public safety issue, the city ought to have a mechanism, or a real easy mechanism to enforce that it get fixed.
I don't know if that's a function of code compliance or not, to be honest.
Okay, maybe it
I
is.
don't know quite enough about it to be able to answer that, but I can find out.
Okay.
So to answer your question, Howard, I'll double check that with Public Works. I know there was some discussion early on internally between myself and Scott and Joanne. I believe, and I'll have to double check the code amendment. I think they wanted to keep it. I don't want to say vague, but they wanted to say like as per Public Works allows, like the standardized one that they have. So I'll double check that though, because I think they were having a hard time pinning down exactly which one they wanted, because sometimes the suppliers go away, and even if they are a longtime supplier, so.
What's the next item?
Anything else? You know what the next item is.
So do you need a motion, Will?
Oh,
Doesn't
No,
say
this was just
action.
to bring it forward.
It doesn't say
It's
action.
just a work session, so I just wanted to make sure that,
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
is just
Just
a.
says discussion.
To see if everybody's okay with it, or any ideas or comments or whatever.
great.
It's great,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 5, adjournment.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move we adjourn.
I have a
Second.
motion, I have a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 I'm hungry.
Opposed? This meeting is over. We are out.